Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Lecture Series. Sit back, get comfortable, and let's go see what they have for us today.
We have really an extraordinary speaker today, Mr. John Fer, who is Director of Ministries at Mary Star of the Sea in San Pedro. But his background is what we want to talk about and hear. As a U.S. Air Force pilot in Vietnam who flew RB-66s, which were reconnaissance aircraft. He was unfortunately shot down and then spent 73 months as a guest of the Hanoi Hilton and spent time with John McCain as a cellmate. Please help me welcome Mr. John Fer.
Thank you, Marty, very much for that kind introduction, and thank you to Gerald and Betty Wheaton for taking all of this time to help me put this together. What I'd like to do today is put my POW experience in perspective. Would like to emphasize the effects that it had on me and what the results were as a consequence of my becoming a POW in North Vietnam. I want to go back to the happy day that all of this incarceration in North Vietnamese began. This is Gia Lam Airport. The first release took place on the 12th of February of 1973, but I was released on the 4th of March. I was in the second large group of 105 people. The first group had about the same number. This is a table with the exchange officers. This is the ranking colonel. To his left is a brigadier general who was actually the team chief. To their right were the Vietnamese. This is, if you can see it, in the left half near the pith helmet, a bus. And off of the bus are coming the POWs in the clothes that I'm about to show you. Now, the clothes that we're wearing, and that's my navigator, Jack Bomar. Notice he's got civilian clothes on and he's got a duffel bag. The next fellow, you probably won't recognize because he's got a lot of hair. That's me. And that's when I was a captain. Wearing the same clothes but not carrying a duffel bag. The duffel bag carries a lot of artifacts and souvenirs and things that some of the POWs wanted to bring home with them. My bottom line, if you saw the movie Return with Honor with Tom Hanks as the presenter, it was done some years ago. In that film, I said, I've been there, I've done that, I don't need any artifacts to remind me of what I experienced. And so I came off the airplane wearing just those clothes, and that's our path to the rear end, the loading end of the C-141. What I'd like to do is just sort of show you in real life here the type of clothes that were issued to us. The undershirt is the white garment that you see. A belt was for the trousers, and the T-shirt, so to speak, is the brown garment. This is a jacket that was issued to us that you saw in the film, pretty nondescript. All of these garments have no labels in them. No labels whatsoever. Now, because they were issued by the North Vietnamese, it could be, my supposition, manufactured outside Vietnam. They didn't have a garment industry, so they may have been imported from an East European country with whom they did a lot of business. Okay? So that's the jacket. And these are the trousers. One size fits all. Why the civilian clothes? Because the fundamental reason is because from the day the first POW was captured, we were typed as war criminals, subject to trials. And so we were never acknowledged by our rank, our serial numbers, nor on release with wearing the military clothing, which was the flight suit that we were shot down in. Now, a lot of fellas had them all ripped up and torn up, like mine was, from shrapnel and from going out of the airplane. But our government could have supplied uniforms for us, but did not do that. And the reason was because the Vietnamese insisted, we have all the clothing they need. You don't need to supply anything. So in expediting the release and all that sort of stuff, and cutting to the quick, and getting this war behind us, and all those things we've heard about so much, the American government said, okay, we'll accept them however they come out dressed. It always irked me because I talked with our senior ranking officers and I emphasized to them, we must leave the way we came in, dressed in the uniform of our services, whether it be Navy, Marine Corps, or the Air Force, and with dignity, of course, but dressed as we were shot down. That didn't come to pass. So we had the civilian clothes, which maintained the declaration by the North Vietnamese that we were war criminals, even though the trials had not been held. Senator Fulbright, for all of his opposition to the war, did insist that the Vietnamese not convene any war trials, and they dropped it. This is in my younger days as well. This is a picture of the RB-66. Now, this is an RB-66 because this picture was taken at Shaw Air Force Base where I got checked out in South Carolina, in Sumter, South Carolina. The next airplane is the EB-66C. The tail looks a little bit different. In there are all sorts of jamming antennae, other gadgets. Now, just forward or to your left of that white star on the side, and inside is a special section where 4 electronic warfare officers sat, what we called Ravens. The Ravens would cut signals, they would jam threat signals as we flew our pattern up north of Hanoi. And another model of the airplane that flew with us, and we always flew in twos, in the B model, all along this bottom part here would be antennae extended, looking like sort of sharp prongs that this fellow here in the left side, along with the other two, the pilot here and the navigator on the other side, would just turn on, and they would barrage jam. And all of these electronic gadgets inside here on that B model were set to various frequencies that we expected we would find on the ground. SAM guidance, SAM acquisition, tracking, early warning stuff, both for AAA anti-aircraft and the surface-to-air missiles. And so they'd turn it off and they'd turn those on and they'd jam just arbitrarily a whole frequency of signals, okay? And then our people on this airplane were more selective, because a couple of them would listen to threat sites and then plot them on charts to take back and compare with what we knew already existed on the ground. A couple of other guys back there, 2 of the other 4, would then listen to threat signals of various frequencies, and they would jam them selectively, just selectively. We took off from the lower left on the map here, a Royal Thai Air Base called Tak Lee. And on the day, the 4th of February, that I took off about 1:30 in the afternoon. I flew just about due north. And then we would turn to the northeast and hit an IP right about in here. Now, this is where the famous Thud Ridge is located. It's a low-lying stretch of mountainous terrain where the 105s, who were also stationed with us at Tak Lee, would fly the same track, hit a point here just northwest of Thud Ridge, and they called it Thud Ridge because the Thud was a nickname for the F-105 Thunder Chief. They'd fly up this way, and then they'd fly right down to Hanoi. And this was my target on that day, Thai Nguyen. It was a troop barracks and a steel mill. Now, around Hanoi was defined probably the heaviest air defense system that modern warfare has ever experienced. As a result, they had SAM sites scattered all the way around Hanoi. There were supposedly no sites out here where I was orbiting. Unfortunately, overnight, from the previous day's missions, the North Vietnamese had moved a mobile site out there, which was directly under our flight path. I had just come north and turned east to go set up a pattern. I reached this easternmost point and was about to turn outbound according to the navigator's instructions when the guys in the back end said, hold it just a minute, delay your turn. That usually means we're on to something, so don't change your flight path. When the C model jams, we jam in a cone, which is about 45 degrees. And it's a cone directly below the airplane. When you roll into a bank, that cone follows the bank of the airplane. So that if you're jamming directly with maximum intensity and doing good work, when you roll, you're actually pointing your cone out onto the horizon and you'll miss what's directly below you. What happened was that we flew out here. They said, don't turn yet, which I assume they meant they're cutting a signal. And then when we got out here very close to the far extreme, the guys in the back end, the Ravens, electronic warfare officer, said, okay, start your turn now. And the navigators, so that we wouldn't turn into China, said, make it tight. So I called to the escort airplanes, the F-4s, and I said, we're turning hard left. So as soon as we rolled, we changed the effectiveness of our jamming, and that's when they launched 4 missiles at the airplane, and 2 of them did damage. One of them fractured the windscreen on the left side of the airplane, fractured this plexiglass side panel here on my side, and then the 4th missile actually impacted this left side amidships, and it broke it in half. Lost control of the airplane, and when I did that, I rang a bell, and a light flashed, a red light flashed at the same time when I rang the bell to indicate the guys in the back end should eject. 1 guy went out, the other 3 couldn't go out because they were killed by the impact. So I lost the 3 on the left side, and the guy on the right side that was furthest away from the explosion got out of the airplane. We ejected from the airplane, it was unflyable, obviously, and we ejected, and we came down just north of Tai Nguyen here. And from that point, it was about 45 minutes I was on the ground. I had some shrapnel wounds from the left side. Navigator got wounded. The guy in the back end, Jack, never got touched because he was the furthest away. And I got banged up because those of you that worked on the, over at Douglas have worked on that A3 know there's only a very small overhead panel which goes before the seat ejects, through which you can exit the airplane. So when I went through, I had all of this gear on, and my arms were extended, so it kind of shredded my flight suit when I went up through this small hole. And the yoke, the steering yoke, did not stow forward the way it was supposed to be. And I don't think the seat went all the way to the rear the way it's supposed to, give you separation from the flight instrument panel, okay, so your legs wouldn't get injured. So as a result, I had a badly injured knee. I had scraped up. I was all banged up. So when I went out, I was kind of incapacitated in a sense, you might say, and in shock. And when I landed on the ground, I was there about 30 minutes before the militia came along, and I hightailed it up the hill to try to get away from them. But I ran into brambles and undergrowth and vines and trees growing real close together. I couldn't get past them. So I looked around, and I said, where am I going to hide? I found a banana tree that was about 9 or 10 inches in diameter. And of course, I'm wider than that. And I'm wearing an olive drab flight suit. It's not camouflage, but it's olive drab. And I squeezed myself down, and I hid behind this thing. And it was like a giraffe and a herd of goats, really, to really compare it to reality. Well, anyway, they were so excited. The militia was so excited, they all ran past me. They didn't even see me. And then they reached the same barriers that I reached, and they couldn't go any further. So they stopped, and I heard this deadly silence. They turned around, I assume, and looked back down the hill, and that's when all heck broke loose. They saw my back, and they screamed and hollered, and they came down, stripped me of all my clothes, down to my socks, undershirt, and one of those little tank tops that I just showed you, and my shorts, okay? Blood-stained, banged-up knees, the whole works. I was in shock. Took everything away, my wallet, my Geneva Convention card, which they're entitled to take. I took my ID card, my Air Force ID card, took anything that was removable, okay? So, marched me to the along a small path through rice paddies to the headman's house in a small village, and I sat there until it got dark. In the meantime, my navigator showed up, and the third fellow showed up that got out in the back end, Jack Davies, the Raven, and so we were put on a Jeep, a large Jeep-like vehicle, almost the size of a Hummer, and spent all night going into Hanoi. And they brought us to what we call the Hanoi Hilton. The Vietnamese name is Hoa Lo, which means burning furnace. Burning, and it gets hot, I'll tell you. And this upper left portion of Hoa Lo, or the Hanoi Hilton, is where the interrogation, the initial interrogations took place, right in here. Every POW went through there. So we went in there, and I went into this particular interrogation room, and I was told to stand, and I was shivering. I was in shock. It was cold. It gets real cold in Hanoi in February, believe it or not. And the fellow that came in is going to be the interrogator, we nicknamed, I found later on, the Eagle. The Eagle was a very knowledgeable English-speaking interrogator. He brought with him a little guy that we also nicknamed the Monkey Man, because he looked like a monkey. He was a very disagreeable fellow, I was to find out. But anyway, he followed orders. And the interrogator started out, the Eagle started out with name, rank, service number, and your date of birth. Okay, the code of conduct says that we're required to give name, rank, service number, and date of birth, and evade answering further questions to the utmost of our ability. And so I did, name, rank, service number, and date of birth. I thought to myself, just the way we were taught in survival school, interrogation training, just the way we're supposed to be. And then he said, what is your unit? And I said, I've got him here. I'm just going to refuse, and he'll just get tired of questioning me, and he's going to stick me in the big compound with all the rest of the tough nuts, and we'll live out the war. And he said, what is your unit? And I said, I can't tell you that. Well, the Monkey Man came across from my right side, and he hauled off and gave me a good hard slap alongside the face. And I said, ha, this is exactly what we were taught. They're going to try to intimidate me, and I'll be too tough. They'll throw me in the big compound with the other tough nuts, and we'll put in our time in the war in this compound, getting letters, packages, just the way we're supposed to. He said again, what is your unit? I said, I can't tell you that. The Monkey Man came across again. I got slap number 2. I said, see, I'm really holding out. They're trying to intimidate me. Third time, he said, what's your unit? I said, I can't tell you. And that's when the Monkey Man brought out this great long strap, or rope, if you want to call it that, about 10, 12 feet long, and proceeded to put handcuffs behind my back with the wrists opposed. And they were these kind of handcuffs that have no flexibility to them. They look like miniature stocks, okay, with a key that locks them shut. Put them behind me. Then he proceeded to weave that strap or that rope from the wrists back and forth, all up and down my forearms, all the way up to my shoulders, and each time tighter and tighter. And then he put his foot on my side of my body and really wrenched him down real tight. Well, that cuts off all the circulation. Then he tied it off, and I was sitting on the floor, and they both of them got up and walked out of the room. And it got painful. It got painful. You can imagine when you stop that circulation, you get no blood to your extremities. It really hurts. And to this day, I don't know how long I held out, but it was not as long as I thought I could. I always considered I was pretty tough. Always thought I was pretty tough. Played football, watched all the John Wayne movies, all that stuff. I thought I was pretty tough. Trained right, went through some good training, but this was really painful. This was really painful. So I gave a scream, and I said, okay, I'll tell you what my unit is, They all came back, untied me, and then all the blood rushes back into those extremities again, and that really hurt. So I staggered to my feet, my arms are hanging to my sides. And the Eagle said, okay, what is your unit? Well, I had a real moment of great guilt at that time. I said, you know, Fer, you finked out on this. Remember those words. You're a wimp. Those are the words I used to myself. I said, you can't give in. And so when he said, what's your unit again? I said, I can't tell you. This is not the right answer. So I went back into the straps again, and this time when I screamed and hollered, they didn't come back in right away. So they did come back after a while, untied me, the same feelings and all that sort of stuff I went through. And then I told him what my unit was, 41st TAC Recon Squadron. Okay. And where did you fly? Okay. Out of Tockley. Then he wrote all this down. Interrogators are very thorough people. They write all of these details down in a little notebook. Then he said, now let me regress just a little bit here and remind you that Lyndon Baines Johnson, always thought that a reasonable man could sit down around a negotiating table and reach an agreement with unreasonable people. Our contemporary times tell us we're in the same situation right now, okay? You can't negotiate on the one hand. You couldn't negotiate on the one hand with the North Vietnamese, nor can you negotiate in contemporary times with a terrorist. You can't. Ideologically, they are committed to a certain path. Ho Chi Minh, the president of North Vietnam, had been fighting the French since 1929, when he founded the Indochina Communist Party. The Vietnamese people had been fighting against French imperialism since 1854, and they finally threw them out 100 years later at Dien Bien Phu. So to think, all those Harvard-educated guys, to think that you could sit down with a guy that's been fighting for independence, similar maybe to our own independence in 1776, and negotiate a peaceful settlement to this war that they've been fighting for a long, long time, and that they felt they were cheated out of in the Paris peace talks of 1954, is preposterous. So he asked me, so Lyndon Johnson said, we'll stop the bombing up north during our Christmas and during the New Year's and their Lunar New Year. Now, as I recall, the Chinese New Year and the Tet and the Lunar New Year is about to come pretty soon. It's almost coincidental that in 1973 on this date, the same thing happened. He said, what are the targets after Tet? This is what the Eagle asked me. What are the targets after Tet? Well, I'm a captain. I'm a line pilot. I haven't got the foggiest idea what the targets are going to be after the Lunar New Year, when the bombing starts again over the north. Of course, he doesn't believe me. He thinks I know all of this stuff. So when I said I don't know what those targets are, back into the straps again. This time, of course, you might imagine I'm pretty well beat down. I said, I got to get a hold of this thing and give them what we learned in survival school, inaccurate, misleading, or erroneous information. But it's got to be so simple. You remember the old KISS principle? Keep it simple, stupid, K-I-S-S? It's got to be so simple that you can recall it time and time again when you're asked. Because remember I told you he writes down all the answers, the interrogator writes. Because if they come back and they catch you in a lie, then they lay the guilt trip on you. And you're liable to spill more beans. So you got to keep it simple. So I told him the targets after Tet are going to be the oil storage depots and oil transportation, shipping of oil products. Well, how did I know it? I read it in Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper. And I knew he knew that it was in Stars and Stripes because that was the headline the day I got shot down. We hit the oil storage depots. And so it was plausible. So he accepted that. The next question was, when are the B-52s coming to Thailand? Now, if you recall, the B-52s, when they were bombing the north around the DMZ and just north of the DMZ, they were bombing from the 17th parallel all the way up to Vinh. The B-52s were flying from Guam, a long, long mission. They had to refuel coming to North Vietnam, do their bombing, turn around, refuel, and go back again. So it was a long, long, long trip. You can't see it on this map, but south of the word Thailand here is the Gulf of Thailand, where there's a place called Utapao, or Pattaya Beach was the resort, but Utapao was the town. And we were building a long, long runway down there, 14,000 feet. So this guy, the interrogator, wanted to know when are the B-52s coming to Thailand. Because you can see now all I have to do is fly up this way to North Vietnam rather than off the chart there, all the way across refuel. It's an unrefueled mission otherwise. He wanted to know that I didn't have any idea. I told him I didn't have any idea. So I'm back into the straps again. So when I came out, I made up a date. I just made up any date. I think I might have told him 4th of July, and he wouldn't have known. So I said 4th of July. Okay. So that got me off the hook. The rest of the day I spent in that room pretty much by myself. So I was sitting there. They brought in the rice. They brought in this cup of tea. And I looked over there. I didn't touch it because I thought it had been there. I was so out of focus. I thought it had been there all morning, overnight. Somebody else had been in there interrogating, and they had urinated in this cup. So I didn't touch it. I didn't have any appetite for the rice either. But I went to the table where it was all sitting. I sat down on another stool behind the table, and I was just looking at the table. And on this table, I saw a statement that was scratched in with ink in very precise letters. All POWs learn this code. And this is what I saw etched on the table. That's our alphabet, 5 by 5. Now we're about to move from that first part of military interrogation to the second phase. Military interrogation is perishable. It has to be timely, and so that's why the torture. And that's why the Eagle was so focused on it. Because tomorrow's intelligence is what we want. Yesterday's intelligence doesn't do us any good tomorrow. So we want to know what the targets are going to be. Now we're moving into the political propaganda side of interrogation. And it's unique in that it is open-ended. POWs never knew, in fact, American people, sadly, never knew when the war was going to end. Vietnamese interrogators always took advantage of that, always letting you know that you were lonely, left alone, you were never going home, your family doesn't care, your government doesn't care, you're going to end up dying here. That was their theme. So when I sat at the table and I saw this, I thought, what the devil does that mean? But I parked it away in the back of my mind. And so after 2 days in that particular interrogation room, the first night I slept on the floor. They gave me a blanket. I slept on the tile floor. I moved up into, still in solitary confinement, into a place we called the Riviera. Now, a little explanation there. All of the cell blocks in the Hanoi Hilton, those portions that were broken up into cell blocks, and then within that, individual cells of 1 person or 2 people or even 4 people, but all small. All of the cell blocks, which made up individual cells, were named after the casinos in Las Vegas. You know, Americans like to give names to things. It's just the way we are. It's a common reference point. So when and I'll explain this communications thing here, when we started communicating, when I was drawn into the communications thing, you had to identify proximity of various cells, what took place in certain areas in the camp, and so forth. Okay? So the guys that got shot down first, the Air Force guys, were 105 people. They had been through training at Nellis Air Force Base, which is located outside of Las Vegas, where the casinos are. So I moved in to little single cells in a little block called Riviera. The rest of that part of the camp was made up of the Stardust, the Mint, which were also single cells, solitary cells isolated from the rest of the camp. We had the Desert Inn and the Golden Nugget. I think that's the major portion of them. And so I moved into the Riviera, and I lived there by myself for a week or so. And that's where I met the camp commander, whom we nicknamed Frenchie, because he spoke very good French. Halting English, but very good French. And he was called Frenchie. He brought me, on the night of Tet, he brought me coffee, believe it or not, that real sweet, very delicious coffee for Tet. Anyway, I stayed there for a week or so. And then I moved into I moved into another room called the library or the infirmary, whatever. It was a big room, about 20 by 20, that was set up by the Vietnamese, I learned afterward, from other POWs, as a library and an infirmary where they would take people to treat them for, I don't know, a headache or something, whatever. Major medical attention was almost non-existent. So anyway, I moved into this room, and one night I heard voices. I said, boy, those sound like American voices. So I pushed this little table over against the back window, which was a great big open space, window if you will, with bars on it, no glass. And I climbed up on top and I said, hey, who's out there? And they got quiet. Because I learned later, if they caught you communicating, they put you through the rope trick. Okay? Punish you, they called it. We will punish you. They got quiet. I said, who's there? And then, very timidly, a voice said, who is that? I told him it's John Fer. And they said, were you shot down? I said, yes. He said, what date? I said, the 4th of February. So now, of course, you know, it's about 7 days. That's about the 11th or 12th. I said, the 4th of February, and then his voice came back and said, this year? And I thought, of course, this year. And they said, what's your serial number? And I told them, FR 63823, which is the old one. He only didn't have Social Security back then as a number, so I gave him my number. And apparently they were satisfied I was an American and not a Vietnamese trying to trick them. And they said, do you know the tap code? Bing! I thought of this thing, and I don't know why. I said, yes, get on the wall. And it was a guy named Sam Johnson, who is now the congressman from Texas. I didn't know this code by rote yet. So I got my bar of soap, which I was issued, and a rusty nail that I had found, and I put my ear against the wall. And Sam starts tapping. And gradually I figured this out. The rows and the columns all have an identifying place in space, if you will. A through E is row 1, all the way down horizontally to V through Z, which is row 5. Starting from the left, column 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So it's a perfect 5 by 5. When Sam started tapping on the wall, and I had my bar of soap with my old rusty nail, I was copying down all the letters on my bar of soap, and then I'd rotate it to the edge, and I'd rotate it to the big side until I had the message, because I wasn't quick enough yet to decode it in my mind. So Sam would type an A, tap an A, for instance, with a 1, a B with, and then a C, like that, okay? So he would type first of all, or tap first of all the row, and then the column, and put the words together. When I talk with young people, I always tell them, you think you're so smart that you invented texting. I said, no, you didn't. You didn't invent texting. We did. But actually, we didn't. The Navy brought this into the camps. But the people that use the tap code go back to the Civil War, believe it or not. But anyway, the Navy brought it in, and we started making words out of the letters by typing the rows and the columns. And then pretty soon, during the transmission of these messages, you'd get the gist of it all, and you'd give him a quick, I understand. I understand. So he'd move on. He'd move on. He'd move on. So you could communicate a lot. Later on, when we got time out in the yard, for instance, we used to have a bamboo broom issued to us when we had cleanup duty out in the courtyard. We'd throw buckets of water onto the sidewalk, and then we'd sweep the dirt and stuff like that into the gutter, open gutters. We would send signals with the sweeping of the broom. Sweep, 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 sweep. And this way, you didn't have a common wall to worry about, because that's the only people you could communicate, people on the common wall. And sometimes when there was a break, it wouldn't carry to the other end. And the vibration through the walls is very, very clear, is very clear. So we would use that, and you could send the message to the entire camp. Now, Jeremiah Denton, who was the first guy off on the 12th of February, remember, he made his famous welcome home remarks, God bless America, we've served under very difficult circumstances, etc. We're profoundly grateful, that sort of thing. He had a cold and the sniffles the whole time he was there. And so, to hear him out in the courtyard, spit, cough, sneeze, was not uncommon. And so, we never, within the prison complex, ever looked at the regulations or the mistreatment of the Vietnamese as an obstacle to our achieving the bottom line, and that is establish communications such that we could then create an organization for what? Resistance. For resistance. And that was the bottom line. Now we're in that phase I talked about, propaganda, trying to make us feel bad, trying to make us feel like we weren't wanted. And the way that we kept everything together was that we accepted our responsibilities. I was a junior officer, so I didn't have much of a play, but the senior ranking officers, even though they were in solitary confinement for as long as 7+ years, Admiral Stockton, who died about 18 months ago, Jerry Denton, Bill Lawrence, the Navy commander, all of those people were kept in solitary confinement. Robinson Reisner, Jim Kassler, both of Mesa's in Korea, okay, kept in solitary confinement. But we always communicated with them through this signal. I was on the comm team for a long time. When I moved in with McCain in 1970, he and I were on the communications team, okay? He was really great at the mute code. And he used to get on his little tippy toes, because he's not very tall. He'd get on his little tippy toes, and to the next cell across the courtyard, he'd use that mute code with his fingers, and you could send words. I wasn't so quick with that, so my responsibility was to climb up into the window in the big rooms, and I had a black sock that was given to us through one of the packages, and the walls around the window were whitewashed. And so I would take the black sock and flash the Morse code that way, all the way across the compound to General Reisner, or then Colonel Reisner, so that even though he was in solitary confinement, he could send us messages and give us guidance, and we could give him the results of what we were trying to accomplish. So that long extrapolated time that we're kept in solitary confinement, and then later with smaller rooms, and then when the Sante raid took place out up in North Vietnam, when they tried to get the POWs out of the camp at Sante, when we were moved into Hanoi, into bigger rooms, all of that was to get the organization together, was to get the senior ranking officer to know who his other people were, pass out directions, pass out orders, and things like that. Having established communication through the TAP code, and then bringing together an organization to resist exploitation, particularly political exploitation. And you know, there was a group of 7 guys that were sort of like the duty. They were the duty entertainers for the visiting left-wing people. They would be trundled out and sit around this big table with beer and the little cup of nuts and candy and all that stuff, and smile for the cameras, and for Jane Fonda, or Tom Hayden, or Ramsey Clark, or some of these people that would come up in there, and they'd be the duty exploitees, okay? And then and then they'd go back to their special condition cells and all that stuff, where they probably got letters from home and packages, and they got to read, literary material and things like that. None of the things that the rest of us got. Okay, so they were people who had, for some reason or other, succumbed to the exploitation for political purposes. A lot of guys resisted that by, like Stockdale, by cutting himself deliberately, bruising his face, until they wouldn't take him for those sorts of things. There were 11 other guys who accepted early release, contrary to the code of conduct. I'll neither accept parole nor special favors, no early release. The commanding officer of the POW camp says you will not go home before the sick, the wounded, and then afterward in order of shoot-down date. Okay, well, these 11 guys thought it was in their best interest that they would kiss it all off, turn their back, and go home. And they did. Every POW was required to memorize every name that we knew of in North Vietnam so that nobody was left at the end of the war. When we moved into this lower right section of Wallow or Hanoi Hilton, all 350 POWs were in this one complex here in this lower right portion of the camp. That's where we got names, faces put together so that you knew that if somebody's name was Smith, S-M-I-T-H and not S-M-Y-T-H, you could get rid of the S-M-Y-T-H because all of this information, once again, was tapped over the walls. That's the only way we had the names at the outset. Then gradually, when the Vietnamese would shuffle camps and you'd go to a different camp in different parts of Vietnam, you would see different faces and put a name with that face. But this is the only one where all 350 POWs were housed at the same time. And that was the result of the Sante raid, the commando raid, that Bull Simon and the Special Forces people performed up in North Vietnam. It scared the Vietnamese so badly that they moved us all into this camp where they could guard all 350 in one camp rather than scattered throughout the North. Now, except for those few that I've sort of outlined to you, what was the bottom line key? What was the bottom line key to the return with honor of the POWs, the vast number of POWs, compared to what we faced in Korea? Remember, there were 22 guys that refused to go home from Korea. They stayed in the North and they went into China. There were a lot of germ warfare confessions. There were a lot of other confessions regarding the bombing of hospitals and leprosaria and all that other stuff in Korea. Okay? What was the difference in that there weren't, except for those few people I've told you about, what was the reason, do you think, between the results in Korea, out of which came the Code of Conduct in 1955, which President Eisenhower ordered be written. So the bottom line, I think, that occurred since that time was, number one, 99.9% of the POWs in North Vietnam were college educated and had a degree. It's the only way you could fly an airplane, for one thing, as a pilot. Had to have a college degree. The backseaters had college degrees. Okay? So college educated. In Korea, large portions of the POWs, particularly in the early part of the war, when the North Koreans came across, were enlisted guys, conscripts. Okay? Didn't have the benefit of a college education, no training with respect to resistance and all that sort of stuff with this Chinese exploitation of mind games and all that sort of stuff. Okay? We'd been trained with that stuff. So training was a second aspect of it. The Code of Conduct was stressed more because we had it. Individual responsibility and collective responsibility was emphasized. And so we had, those were the three big aspects: college education, the training, the survival schools, and Code of Conduct. Given that framework, we had good leadership. We had commanders, senior people in responsible positions before they were captured, who assumed command because it was their responsibility. If I am senior, I will take command. That's in the Code of Conduct. You don't shrink from your responsibility. Within the POW environment there, some men were not permitted to take command by the officers senior to them because they didn't exemplify the standards that were expected of them. There was nothing collaborative about them. There was nothing dishonorable. It's just that they weren't tough enough. You had to know when to dig in your feet, get your men to follow, and when to back off a little bit. Okay? Now, you might ask, how do you pass the time? How do you pass the time? In solitary, just like everybody else up there, what I did was I called on things that interested me. I had always been interested in the stock market. I had just started investing in the stock market, so I used that during some of my dead time to hypothesize investments, appreciation, dividends, all that sort of stuff. I also owned a piece of land outside Colorado Springs that I had purchased before I got shot down near the Air Force Academy where I graduated, that I was going to put a mountain A-frame in. So I built an A-frame house in my mind, and then when I got it completed, I took it down brick by brick, board by board, and I redesigned it, and I built it again. I have always been a very religious person, so I prayed a lot too. I prayed a lot, morning, midday, and in the evening. I've always been very physically fit in my viewpoint. So I exercised a lot. I did the most boring exercises in the world, sit-ups, push-ups. I ran in place. You don't go anywhere, but you have to run in place. You have to get your heart together. I took the bucket that they put our waste in, the feces and the pee bucket that was in every cell. And in the morning, of course, when you get up and down every night and you fill it up, and during the previous day, it gets full. And so I used that as a dumbbell. I did curls. People have often asked me, well, how did you do that? I said, very carefully. And I'd work each arm and then out to the side, all that sort of stuff, to keep muscle tone. And so it's very important that you improvise. And I walked constantly, back and forth, 5 steps. That was the length of my cell when I was in solitary. Gradually, when things got better and we moved together into the larger rooms, what we used was not only the physical exercise, we had church services. We had a guy, Quincy Collins, who had a dance band before he became an Air Force officer and knew music from memory. So he would take the toilet paper that we issued, and it always came in big sheets about 2 foot square. And when you used it for toilet paper, you tore it up in little 4-inch squares and then stacked them, Quincy would take the 2x2 sheets, and then he would write his music on there with homemade ink. And the way we did the ink, because cigarettes were issued by the Vietnamese, 6 per day to each smoker, we would keep the ashes in a common receptacle, add a little bit of sugar, which came in some of the packages from home, add some water, stir it up, and make some doggone good black ink. Later on, when some of the packages had Kool-Aid in it, and we wanted to make colored ink, you'd put some of the Kool-Aid in there, the colored Kool-Aid, and you had colored ink. Well, Quincy would write all of his music on these big sheets of paper, and he had rehearsals with his little choir, his church choir, every day. So we had the church choir. McCain and I were teamed up with 2 other guys to be the chaplains. And we would rotate every 4th Sunday with a scripture reading. And incidentally, Catholics in those days, speaking for myself, Catholics in those days didn't read the Bible very much. That was a priest's job, to proclaim the scriptures and all that. Now we do a little bit more of it. So when I wanted a scriptural reading, I went to the guys in the room who knew scripture, chapter and verse, backwards and forward. Southern Baptists. These guys, I'll tell you. Jim Sehorn, I'll never forget him. He knew, and he was one of the chaplains, he knew his scripture. So I said, Jim, I need something on Easter. Give me a good scripture reading on Easter. And he'd get it, and I'd copy it down. Now remember, we were never allowed to have a Bible. As opposed to those turkeys down there in Guantanamo who get their Koran, we didn't get a Bible. We didn't get a Bible. And we didn't throw feces at the guards either like they do down there. We didn't do that. But anyway, Seahorn would give me a good scripture reading. Then I would come up with a sermon, or McCain would come up with a sermon. And we'd give that. The guys would sit there, and we'd have a community prayer. Quincy would be interspersing all of these things with a hymn, singing. And then we'd go about the regular day. And it happened every Sunday. So we had religious services. We had our own individual physical exercise programs. And then we had education, academic education. At one time, in our large room of about 50 guys, after the Sante raid and we lived in this part of the camp, I was studying at one time 4 different languages. I was learning Spanish, I was learning German, French, and Russian. And there were guys in those rooms, believe it or not, once again the American exceptionalism, who came together who were experts in various aspects of their careers, besides flying airplanes or navigating airplanes. We had a guy that was a meat cutter, a Mustang that had come up through the ranks in the Navy, ended up being an F-4 backseater, who was a meat cutter before he came into the Navy. And I sat through, and I'm being honest with you, the most boring 8 weeks of my entire life on how to cut up a hog. Believe it or not. Jack Rollins was an excellent instructor, but you can only look at the picture of a hog on the wall on this toilet paper with the lines that demark all the various cuts until you really get bored. Now, I had to leave the class. And go take a break when he started moving on to horses, because I wasn't really interested in horse meat, and he was going to teach us how to cut horses. He was an excellent man to do that. Ed Martin, who was an admiral's aide before he got shot down, had been all over the Western Pacific, various port calls as the aide, and so he gave us a geography lesson of the Far East. We had John McCain. He's a well-read man in great literature. He would give a good presentation on literature, not only the classics, but people like Ringlardner, the popular magazine article writers and people like that. My sole interest was, once again, as I mentioned earlier, telling movies. I told John Wayne movies. And with all the action and all the embellishments and all that sort of stuff. So that was the entertainment night. So all of these things went toward using up dead time. And if you don't use dead time, then you start falling back on what the Vietnamese would like you to do, feeling sorry for yourself. Why me? Oh God, why me? Okay? But you can't allow that to undermine your resistance posture or your ability to improve your position. Treatment made its biggest improvement, the treatment of the POWs with letters, packages, other communication from home, when Ho Chi Minh died. I never got more than 4 letters in the whole time I was there. My father wrote to me 241 letters, and 4 of them were given to me, all in the space of 2 days in the middle of 1970, which coincided with the official release of my name as a POW. So from the 4th of February, 67 to the middle of July of 1970, my parents had no official notification that I was a POW, that I was still alive. Americans have that unique ability, that exceptionalism, that when it push comes to shove, to look out for its own. Okay, we've never been forgotten. They have never left an American knowingly behind ever. Sometimes it's a little longer when you come home, but never forgotten us. Ho Chi Minh death gave us better treatment, better communications with home, and then in 1972, just after the 11 days of the bombing, after the peace talks had broken down, The bombing then brought the Vietnamese back to the table, and we were notified shortly thereafter that the agreement to end the war was going to be signed and that we would be going home very shortly. And in late January, after they were signed on the 27th of January of '73, we were brought out in the courtyard and had announced to us that we were going to be going home in groups of about 105 or so, beginning on the 12th of February. And indeed, that's when the first group went home. And then a smaller group of 20 went home on the 20th of February. And then I went home in another group of about 105 or so on 4th of March. And then John McCain was probably about a week after me with his group. When we came off the buses, we were lined up, and as each of our names is called, we came up to the colonel that was standing there. Each name was verified by the people that are sitting down. And when that happened, an escort would come up and escort us out to the airplane. The person that volunteered to be my escort was a classmate from the Air Force Academy, and E.C. Newman would pick me up, and then we would walk over to the airplane, where I got a big kiss from an Air Force nurse, female nurse. But it was a very happy day. That took place on the 4th of March. I spent 4 days at Clark Air Base. Then I flew home to the United States on the 8th, and spent 90 days at March Air Force Base recuperating. I had no serious medical problems. I did get some shrapnel wounds on the left side, right near the areas that Forrest Gump was wounded, and that is the buttocks. So perhaps that's where the shrapnel came. It just ricocheted up and lodged itself. And I guess that's it. I thank you very much for your attention. Have I kept in contact with any of those I roomed with? Yes, in the sense that occasionally when we have our reunions, I see most of them. I went down to McCain's election night thing in Phoenix, and there were a lot of POWs that came down there. And I saw my navigator for the first time in 35 years, Jack Bomar.
Thank you for watching Peninsula Senior Lecture Series. I'm Betty Wheaton. See you next time.